Welcome everyone. How are you today? Welcome Scott. I'll get to introing you to a second. So welcome to our webinar on the road to agency specialization. So I'm Stephen Neville, CEO of BugHerd, former agency owner. This conversation, I guess, is generally a part of mission that we have, which is to help agencies thrive by giving them the tools and the resources they need to succeed. Thrilled to introduce Scott Jacques, who's a principal of and owner of NK Interactive. Scott's agency works exclusively. I muted myself. Scott's agency works exclusively with architectural, engineering, and construction firms. So the AEC sector, servicing revenues anywhere from 50 mil to over 2 billion. So Scott, before I dive into questions, would you love to give us a quick introduction on yourself and NK Interactive and your journey, I guess, to how we started this conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So, as Steve mentioned, we're a remote digital design agency, AEC sector. I would say of that, the AEC, architectural, engineering, construction. A good portion of that work is primarily on the C component of that. So, general contractors and specialty contractors who are working on, as you can guess from the revenue size of some of these companies, these are commercial sized projects. It's not residential projects. So building, the highways you drive on, high rises, data centers, so commercial type projects. I'm based out of San Francisco, and as one of the principals, I lead all user experience and technical strategies on all of our website projects and client engagements. And I also head up all the biz dev efforts on our team. And just a quick few points. Our core focus is absolutely on website design and development, but I think as you'll learn through the conversation, it goes far beyond just websites, and it's really a lot of these custom digital tools that we've created for our clients in this space. Some of the ancillary services we provide for our clients are brand messaging strategy, visual identity, content development. And our core team is composed of myself, Julian, who's another principal who co-leads user experience, oversees all creative, and then we have 3 developers. One front-end developer, 2 CMS developers, and then as needed, we bring in other talent on our projects.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the intro, Scott. It's great background. So today we're going to discuss your transformation journey. So the challenges, unexpected benefits, and practical advice for other agencies considering a similar path. So it's obviously something that comes up quite a lot, with agencies is, go for a broader group or be more specialized. So certainly keen to kind of dig into that and how you got there. Some quick housekeeping. We have the Q&A open as well as the chat. So please ask questions as you go along. We will get to them as we can. If we go, we'll also have some allotted Q&A time at the end. So Scott, let's start, I guess, with the origin story, which is around. Can you share that pivotal moment that led? You were a more generalist agency that led NK Interactive from that transition from a generalist agency into specializing with the AEC sector, and also like what made that industry particularly attractive for you.
Yeah, well, one thing that made the industry particularly attractive is I've always been fascinated with the building process, the built environment. You can't help but drive down any major highway, drive through any major city, and you're just exposed to what these companies do on a day-to-day basis. Again, whether it's highways, high-rise buildings, office structures, renovations of historical buildings. I would say that the journey was not an overnight one. So 15 years ago, we had the good fortune of actually working with one of the larger general contractors in the country. We did some great work for them. That led to some exposure, but it didn't result in an overnight, aha moment where we said, let's specialize in this industry. I would say that it was closer to maybe about 5 years ago when we made an intentional choice to really focus our positioning and our focus area on this particular sector and really go after it. It doesn't mean that we don't currently work with clients that are outside of that sector, but all of our pursuits are really focused in on this particular sector. So, while we will consider, other projects that come in, it really has to meet a certain criteria for us to, sort of take our focus away from that. So, everything that we do actively in terms of pursuing new business is really in that sector of architectural engineering and construction.
Yep. And so you touched on, like, about 5 years ago, you kind of made this intentional choice. So what were the driving forces behind that intentional choice at the time?
I think it was really just seeing what the nature of all the new business inquiries that were coming into us. They were all really focused on that, and so it was really just through a lot of word of mouth referrals, and just the realization that we were starting to really gain some insights into this industry, noticing patterns, talking to different folks across different departments, and hearing and really documenting a lot of these known pain points. And so it was really at that point where I think we had that confidence to go out there and really sort of talk to that marketplace in a confident manner, that we really did understand what it is that they needed, and that we had some documented solutions and a portfolio of work that demonstrated our understanding of that space.
Great. So basically, as you build up that knowledge ongoing, yeah, how you're able to then go and talk to kind of more of those clients. So how would you say that specialized knowledge as you build in a given industry has transformed particularly the client acquisition part of it, and also retention, how long you can keep those clients for?
Yeah, I think on the client acquisition piece of it, you know, I when I get an RFP that comes in to my inbox, I will never just blindly respond to that with a proposal. I always insist that somebody hop on a Zoom call. It's a chance for me to really demonstrate our capabilities. And that's where, the aha moments really start to happen with these prospective clients when they see, okay, what you guys have done is way beyond just websites. And we start to, speak in their terms about different pain points or different solutions that we've provided. And it really it's always astounds me at the reactions that we get instantly, where they understand what we're doing with some of these custom tools that we've built, and how that really addresses some of their specific needs.
Did you have any measurement at the time, I guess, or now, I guess, of your RFP success, before specialization versus afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, before this area of specialization, quite often, putting proposals together would always be a last minute scramble. And, quite often there may be some things. Yeah. I mean, the problem with trying to be everything to everyone is that it definitely, it's really hard to distinguish and differentiate yourself in that space. So what we've seen is like our win rates when proposals do go out, when I'm able to properly walk somebody through that vetting process of just an initial inquiry, a capabilities call, sort of a recap of what the scope of the project should be for an initial phase, as well as all these things that we can build for them in the future. The win rate has really just skyrocketed. It's the percentage of wins for us is huge. And I would say that quite often when we don't get a project, I think it's not necessarily a reflection of what we can do in terms of capabilities, but it's maybe just that particular client is just going to have a hard time, getting that budget approved. And it's not to say that we are an expensive agency. We're not cheap. We're not expensive. But I think we kind of have found that middle ground that allows us to operate in a profitable manner.
Yeah, certainly. And when you kind of put during that transition from a more generalist agency into something more specialized around AEC, what were the core challenges that you faced and through that transition, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges was maybe, coming out of the gates a little bit too prematurely, sort of having self-christened myself or ourselves as subject matter experts. And I think there's, we might even touch upon this. It's kind of a recurring theme, is just, you know, you know, really asking questions, having conversations, and being a great listener, so that you can really start to pick up on some of those pain points, or some of those patterns, so that again, the one thing that, and these are just mistakes that we made, is coming to the table too soon with what we think is a solution, maybe based off of a hunch, based off of a couple conversations. We've now had exposure to regional firms, national firms, marketing departments, companies that don't have marketing teams. And so we have this confidence when we come to the table, but at the same time, it's confidence. It's not arrogance. And there's always this drive for us to continually learn and ask more questions and gain more insights. Because it just means that every time we roll out a project or we're refining some of the tools that we've created, it just gives us a chance just to give ourselves that upper leg as we just continue to refine and better the solutions that we're deploying for our clients.
And so I can imagine that knowledge compounds over time, right? So
Yep.
the more knowledge you build into a given sector, the more that you are able to compound that over time, because it just keeps adding on top of itself. And the same in terms of the relationships that you build into that, that industry as well.
Yep.
How do you flow that through so it doesn't just sit with you, that it sits with, within the organization, like your team? I know it's not a large team, but making sure that, that knowledge is shared amongst the group.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what it's really allowed us to do is to systematize, a lot of our processes, everything from business development to how we kick off projects. I intended to mention this at the beginning of the call, but I think it's helpful just to kind of get an understanding of our general sort of, tech stack when it comes, some of that core tech stack of the tools that we use. And, we use Slack for internal communications. We use Asana for project management. We use Harvest for time tracking, BugHerd, of course, for many years now for internal, external QA on throughout various phases of a web project, Google Workspace. And then our solutions are built on WordPress. But from it's not what you might think of when it comes to WordPress with the level of customization that we've done on that platform, both from a UI perspective as well as just workflows. It is a robust content management system. It's not a design management system. So I mean, I wanted to throw that in there in terms of just kind of refreshing everyone on what that tech stack is that we use. There's some other tools that we use as well, but I think it's helpful to get maybe an understanding of that. But going back to to your question about how we've internalized that, it really just some of these systems that we've created, and also just some of the freedom that the development team has to really go out there and create some of these, because we do have a lot of our underlying technology from one project to the next is leveraging, we're building on top of that. So I think with the tech stack of tools that we've used and just documenting a lot of that stuff, it's really allowed us to really build a foundation, a technology foundation. Obviously from a creative perspective, there's a lot of efficiencies as well, but I think the most obvious one is how we sort of approach our projects from a technology perspective, so that we're not building something from scratch every time.
So I guess in a web project, regardless of the industry, it has a lot of similarities. Okay, you go through the kind of some steps, whether you want to do them in an agile way or a waterfall way. There are some kind of defined phases of what goes on. When you specialize in an industry like the AEC sector, does that change much? Because I imagine their projects, I know the web, understanding where information flows into their marketing teams, and the times that it goes on, and at what, the different times they're under the most pressure. So if they've got to go and, sell apartments at a certain given time, and when that has to go to market and all of that, I imagine that builds some trust with the client, the fact that you understand, their processes quite deeply.
Yeah, I think they're processes, but also, on a pretty intimate level, even things like, data structures around, some common content that, is across the board is applicable to all of these clients, which, one of those areas is their projects, right? So or their so-called case studies and how that then feeds into a portfolio of their work, which is used on their public website, but then it's really also used extensively internally with their team members. So, it just allows you to have much more meaningful conversations with clients early on when you do have that understanding of what their needs are. But again, you're not coming to the table and just defining solutions right off the bat, but you can have some of those more meaningful conversations so that you can find out what some of those unique aspects of their particular business or their brand are that will then influence the creative process, or will influence some of the, the technology solutions that we deploy as it relates to their content management system or some of these other digital tools that we develop.
Okay. And so I understand you've developed, some specific industry-specific digital tooling. So can you work us through how being specialized has, like in one sector, has enabled that type of thinking? And also, obviously share what you can around what they are.
Yeah, yeah. So some of those tools are, where within the content management system, what it's really become for many of these clients is a single source of truth for them for some of that data, because like I alluded to some of these projects, project galleries, in some cases, these are hundreds of projects where it's photography, it's project descriptions, it's, talking about the different services or sectors that it's aligned with. And so, right out of the gates, that's kind of just like baked into our underlying foundation. And then what clients have what we've started to do is actually build all these tools, whether it's the automation of collateral for them, to where now the system is generating, branded project sheets that get slid into their proposal packages or into qualifications packages, or whether it's how they manage their resumes for all their team members, which, these are all critical pieces of information that go into their proposal packages for these large projects that they're contemplating. And prior to that, a lot of that data was just living in multiple places. And so it's really allowed us to create these single sources of truth for certain types of content that they manage on a day-to-day basis for business development purposes, and obviously to power some of the functions of the website.
Yep.
So, the automation of collateral, but then, what we've also built are even some workflow automation tools on top of that that allow clients to really seamlessly create proposal packages. So some of these tools are acting as compilers that allow people just to upload data and then to be able to leverage this data from this single source of truth of projects or resumes. So, they're able to create these beautiful branded packages where there's consistency, and it's literally reduced, the time of internal team members from hours to now it's minutes, where they can focus on the high value stuff that goes into responding to a proposal, and they're not worrying about what font to use on a particular document or what photo to use. It's really streamlined processes for them, and we know that it's effective because, again, when we have those aha moments, when people see it in action, and they can immediately resonate with what we've done. But it's also when we see again, how they respond to this, and it's the efficiencies that it's created for them, and it's a huge time saving for them.
Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, it's a demonstration up front that you understand their business, is that, because those intricate details that a more generalist agency may not, may not have access to.
Yeah, and what it's really allowed us to do as well, aside from building some of these digital tools, it's, we are now in the process. I know that it's not a unique leap for an agency to kind of hone in on a particular area and then see opportunity to actually create a SaaS platform or a hybrid SaaS platform. And that's kind of where we are right now. We know that, all these features and all these pain points that we're addressing are really it's the foundation for what I refer to as a hybrid SaaS platform that we're building now. And, we're kind of experimenting with some pricing strategies on that and how to sell that to this particular marketplace. But right out of the gate, we didn't build something based off of a hunch of what we think the marketplace needs. We've essentially been paid on a professional services capacity to build some of these tools, to gain those insights. So in a way, we've almost been paid to do R&D for what is ultimately going to be this hybrid SaaS platform that we're looking to get a beta version up and running for.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it gives you that opportunity to productize something, and as you said, you're being paid to do the development of that, which is great. We do have a question in the chat, which is, I think it's a great one. You touched on the size of your team, so you have it's a reasonably kind of tight knit team. I imagine you use freelancers. So the question is, do you use freelancers? And if so, do they need to have experience within the AEC sector?
Yeah, I would say that we have some freelancers on the team, but our core team that I'd mentioned, the two principals of the firm and the three developers, we've been working as a cohesive team for some time. Some of those freelancers do come into play where, if we need a brand strategist to come in, a content writer, but these are people who have had tremendous exposure to this particular industry. So they already come in to, a project understanding a lot of the lingo, whether it's our brand strategists, content writers, whether it's photographers who, we need to maybe send out to a job site. They understand the logistics of an environment like this and what it takes to, to pull off a successful day shoot or 2 day shoot and have drones on site to be able to capture some of that media.
Yeah, so super interesting. Um, Go back, do you experience or see opportunities for long-term growth? Well, you actually kind of just touched on this in the SaaS, the kind of SaaS idea that you didn't see possible when you had a broader client focus. So just reiterating, I guess that point, um, you were able to identify opportunity for the future based on the fact that you had more detail about these customers. Do you see obviously the SaaS platform, other opportunities like that?
Outside of the SaaS platform, I can see where some of those opportunities it's more so just in some of the predictability. Like, my degree of confidence when I go into a project and I'm putting a proposal together, again, we're not proposing something that hasn't been done just yet. We're solving a lot of the same problems over and over for some of these clients. But clearly, from a creative perspective and, quite often from a data structure perspective, that's very specific to that particular client. So, when we deploy these solutions from a creative perspective, obviously it's with that brand, that company's, brand attributes in place, whether it's their existing brand standards or whether it's a visual identity that we're helping create for them. Each of those solutions is very specific to that client. But like I said, the confidence that I have when I go in and I'm pitching on a project, there's never this concern of, this project going to go out of scope because, we've already been able to, at the outset, talk to that particular client about, what an initial phase of this project will consist of and what some, future add-ons might look like. And what that does for us too, is it kind of creates these long-term relationships where, clients know what we could deploy for them down the road in the future. But for whatever reason, timelines or maybe just an initial budget they have allocated for a particular year, they know that, in 6 months or in 9 months or in a year, it might then be time to start to bolt on some of these added, functionalities or tools that we've built for that, for this sector.
Yeah, great. When you're thinking about a niche that you're kind of specializing in a certain area, you're obviously playing a risk versus reward game. So it's a classic positioning. If I am focused on a smaller group, I'm able to go deeper and expand to that group versus being more generalist. Now, that's often a very hard process to go through because you feel like you are giving up a lot. There's obviously all markets are more than one single market,
Yeah.
but to all of the reasons you just said, you're able to go deeper. But just answering a question from the chat. So can you describe what market research you did to determine the viability of that sector for you, and specifics, would be most welcome. Like what gave you the signals, whether you did traditional research or not, but what gave you the signals to know this is where I can make money?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it was a very formal sort of process, but there was just this general understanding that, when you think about this particular industry, and again, some folks refer to it as the AEC sector, some folks refer to it as the built sector. It's a massive industry, so when you look at even like the AEC sector, that's, sort of like just that top level, but there are so many sort of sub sectors within that where you could focus in on. And I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier with, where our focus is primarily on that C component of that area. But it's through the different industry publications that I've also I read, and every time you get their lists, whether it's the San Francisco Business Times or the Silicon Valley Business Journal, and they're talking about the top privately held companies, you start to see that there's a large percentage of those companies that are in the construction sector, whether it's general contractors or specialty contractors. Um, and so, I would say that when you are also looking at a potential industry sector, um, quite often it's not just, another example might be, you look at the legal, like the law firms. That's sort of like that top level. But if you start to break that down into all these subcomponents, there's all these different opportunities with there where you can really hone in on some of those sub sort of sectors and areas of specialization, whether it might be personal injury attorneys or whether it might be sole practitioners. So with any of these sectors, they really do sort of expand out into multiple subsectors within an overall sector. But I did do some research, and I think some folks refer to it as TAM, the total addressable market, which is typically something I think you talk about when you're looking at a SaaS platform, but even from a professional services firm, if you look at the total addressable market of what the architectural and engineering and construction sector is, it's massive. And it's also an industry that's always been really slow to adopt and understand the benefit of design or technology. And I've really seen, and I think this maybe goes back to one of the earlier points about 5 years ago, is that I've really started to see a drastic shift, not only in the level of sophistication of marketers that are now in that sector, but also just the understanding of what great design can do for you in terms of creating efficiencies and enhancing their business development processes, and just speeding up, the process with which they go about, winning business, or how it directly impacts another one of the key objectives that most of our clients have a huge pain point with, and it's about talent acquisition. It's a huge industry, but there's a huge shortage of workforce in that particular sector. So it's coming up with strategies for those clients to really help address those needs as well. It's not, our projects are very rarely about we need more work to come in the door. It's more so about, we need tools that are going to support our current business development marketing efforts, and we also need ways to distinguish and differentiate ourselves from a talent acquisition perspective.
I imagine also there's a little bit of knowing who you are and the agency or the organization you want to be, and how that aligns with the organizations that you are serving in that. Because if you want to stay as you're a reasonably tight-knit team and you have a goal to kind of maintain that, that is quite different than if you want to scale your agency to the largest agency in the world, and you have quite different decisions in that, and about the types of organizations you can serve and whether you fit. Because I imagine a smaller team is going to struggle with, I don't know, going, okay, I want to deal with the world's largest online retailers only. That's going to be, the turnaround times, the way that those businesses operate, it's not necessarily the right niche in that sense. So you do have to find the thing that fits the type of organization you want to build as well, both now and into the future.
Yeah, and I think for agency owners, it really comes down to defining, like, what do you want your agency to be? I mean, our goal is never really to be this massive agency. And I love being able to wear multiple hats on projects, and being, a bit of a generalist and touch different aspects of a project. I love being involved in creative reviews and that process, but I also love, just sort of, defining UX and doing deep dives into, information that clients provide for us, and mapping out information architecture through site maps and sketches of wireframes, and defining hierarchies for page types, and then also overseeing some of the technology strategies around workflows. So I think it's really about defining what you want, even defining what type of lifestyle you want, but ultimately it's got to be a business that is profitable. And I don't think there's anything wrong in admitting that, hey, we're in business to make a profit, but to do great work as well, and to have fun. And I can honestly say that every day for me is, I do enjoy doing what I do, and I think it's because I'm not just working on this one particular siloed area of focus, but that's so. I think having a small group like ours, a lean team that can work on many concurrent projects, that's obviously another one of those benefits of specialization, is that I think you can work on more projects concurrently because of some of the systemization that you're able to put in place.
You touched on profitability there, and that's a we've got a whole other webinar on that one for agencies. It's not always an easy thing to measure, as you know.
Yeah.
So what is your key success metric now that you've kind of moved into specialization? Has it changed? Are you measuring something different than you were before? And how have you seen it evolve as you go from that generalist into the more specialized focus?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's we're not doing anything groundbreaking. It's I mentioned we use Harvest for all of our time tracking and projects, and what you do see is that your projects become more profitable. There are those outliers where maybe a project happens to have some scope creep, and for whatever reason, you're whether you're issuing a change order or you're not, but you're just trying to get the work done. But we have seen that the profitability on these projects is becoming more and more predictable. And what that's also allowed us to do is just because you become a specialist in an area, it doesn't mean that you need to discount your knowledge and your expertise. So if anything, incrementally, what we're able to do is bump up what we are charging for our services. And still it's nothing outrageous. It's still within reason. But it does give us that ability to charge a premium for our services without outpricing the market. So again, I mean, Harvest allows us to really track a lot of that time on these projects. That then sort of influences how we scope out and bid other projects in the future without discounting it, without discounting those projects, because just because you become more efficient doesn't mean that you should charge equal to or less than what you feel is the market is willing to bear.
Excellent. Yeah, I certainly imagine that I would be more prepared to pay for someone with industry specialization. So as a client, I've been a client, I've been on agency side. I definitely, if someone can come to me and display to me that they know my industry, they know everything about it,
Yeah.
they know the pressures that I'm under at different times, I would pay for that knowledge at a greater rate than I would for someone where they have to learn that as we go along. And I think it's absolutely a part to that. And if
Yeah.
you add that your projects, you can charge more and your process gets more efficient because you are more
Yeah.
specialized in that industry and what goes on, the combination of those two things adds up to profit at the end of the day. So that's
Yeah.
an excellent outcome.
Yeah. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier, but and yeah, I'm not here professing that, I have all the solutions, and that, we're doing everything. We're doing some things really well, but the one thing that we've always relied on and have been very fortunate over the past 5 years or so is that, the primary channel for all of our business is word of mouth and in referrals. I think there's probably a lot of consultants or specialists who would say that that's just, we're just marching towards our death if we keep down that path. And while I agree with them in some way, it's we're not resting on our laurels, and we're not just sitting back and comfortable with where we are. So there are we are contemplating and looking at ways to maybe be a little bit more outward with some of our business development efforts, whether that might mean some content publishing on LinkedIn, or what that might look like. It's something that is definitely in the back of my mind, just to kind of further future-proof our success and our agency.
Yeah, I mean, even as you mentioned, though, the fact that you're surviving purely off that kind of word of mouth thing shows the benefits, I imagine, of that specialization. Because as an industry, particularly if you're in a kind of localized industry in that sense, they know each other.
Yeah.
So and I imagine it gives you the opportunity to go and more specific when you go to make partnerships with industry players or partners or industry associations, things like that. You get the opportunity to kind of market in that way. That's not just LinkedIn posts. I guess just to wrap up before we kind of get into the final Q&A. And so really on the tangible side of it, I guess, is, for agency owners considering specialization, what are the three things that, that they could start today to begin that journey?
Yeah, yeah, and this might be three, or it might be some sort of one and then 1.2 and 1.3. But I mean, I think I kind of touched on this earlier. Is I think really just maybe defining what you want. Because specialization I think can mean many things to many different people. Maybe the objective is to focus on specialization so that they can create a thriving professional services agency, or maybe specialization has an end goal in mind of having that agency, a profit center in place, but also gaining these insights so that, potentially you can find opportunities to develop, some of these tools, which could then be, a separate entity that, might be a SaaS product, as an example, or a hybrid SaaS. So I think just kind of defining what you want in terms of, your ideal team size, who your ideal clients would be, what kind of lifestyle you want to have as an agency owner, what type of culture you want to build. But certainly, I think once you have identified what maybe a particular sector is that you want to go after, or a subsector, is to just I would say, don't come out of the gate, after a couple of sort of surface level project engagements and, think that, you're going to have all the answers. So, definitely, I think just always having that curious mindset of really, asking questions, having conversations, listening, and let that sort of, shape either how you sort of position your professional, services firm, or, the firm, as well as, potentially even, a product offering that comes out of that. Certainly, reviewing your existing client roster and seeing, are there some trends that you could even see within your existing client base of, some a particular sector. Maybe 60% of your existing client base is representative of, sector XYZ. Are there some opportunities in there to sort of cull through that client list? Uh, and I think there's also opportunity, and this is always a tricky one, with even doing some experimentation where, I think I kind of may have mentioned this, but, early on, some of the projects that we were working on, the budgets were unimaginable. Today there's no way that we would, charge that little for a project, but it did give us that opportunity to get some of that exposure and work through some of the kinks, and just learn a little bit more about the industry. And then, I'd say lastly is just really, making it a goal to really just explore, learn, and network, whether it's through industry publications that are digital, they're print, through networking organizations that, whether again are at the local or the national level, with this particular industry. Some LinkedIn engagement as well, whether it's, seeing who some thought leaders are and they're saying some really interesting things about a particular sector, and following them, engaging with them, connecting with them. And then also just, connecting with some marketing folks that are in that sector that you may be familiar with in companies. And I would say just, always being on the lookout for opportunities to have conversations with folks who are in that industry, where you can gain some insights and just, start to see if you can notice patterns or recurring pain points within that particular industry.
Correct. No, well, thank you very much. We'll just wrap up, I guess, our back and forth now, and get into Q&A. I have my own question just before we kind of do other Q&A, which is, do you need to be passionate about the niche in which you are pursuing?
I think you need to, but I think if somebody was to look at this particular niche, I think a lot of folks say, that's just so boring. It's, hammer swinging. But, if you sort of dig beyond some of that stuff, especially with this industry, it's incredible. I mean, just the level of technology that's now being used on these projects, and just the scale of some of these structures that are being built, to me is fascinating. But I don't think you need to be passionate. I mean, I think as long as there's an opportunity, and there's opportunity to create some cool products, and to not be hampered from a creative perspective, where you can do some great creative work as well. Sometimes that's a nice challenge, because sometimes folks will say, well, you're kind of working with the same companies over. How do you avoid just kind of churning out the same types of solutions? And I think that's where we like to to challenge ourselves on these projects all the time, and not always. I mean, there's some underlying stuff that always is going to be done in a very similar way, but from a creative perspective, how can we sort of attack these projects where it's challenging and it allows for an end product that's really reflective of that company's brand, whether it's their personality, their tone, and just the overall vibe of that organization.
Yeah, excellent. So a couple of questions in the chat. If anyone has any more, please throw them in now. Since deciding to specialize, Scott, have you made any exceptions and taken on a client outside of the niche?
We have, and even on the homepage of our site, there's a little asterisk, next to how we sort of talk about AEC. And I think this is another one of the benefits, I think, of being a specialist. And when you start to have some successes, you can be selective about the type of projects you take on, whether it's within that sector or whether it's another client who's outside of that sector. But maybe there's something really interesting about that particular project. Or it's just a project that would allow you to get some exposure to another industry and to work on a project in a profitable manner. So we don't outwardly pursue those things, but if there are inbound clients or just some of our legacy clients who are acquiring other firms, and there's a new project that emerges, or there are just ongoing projects with that particular client, we certainly entertain those offers if it makes good business sense.
What you could have touched on it then, but do you have an idea of what percentage of your work is from repeat customers, or customers you worked with before versus when you're doing new work?
I would say it's a it's a pretty good mix where we're always working on new projects, where it's just sort of just ground up a website redesign, let's say. But I would say that there's probably about 35% roughly off the top of my head where we're engaged in just ongoing projects with clients, whether it's a small project ask here or there where it doesn't really require a statement of work and we're just doing stuff on a time and materials basis for a client, or if it's a client who's come back to us 9 months later and they said that added feature that was in your original proposal as a future initiative or product we might want to roll out. Let's get rolling with that. So it's really a nice blend of new projects and just ongoing work for existing clients that keeps things fresh, and it's a nice mix of work that we have going.
All right, thank you. Hot topic question, I guess, but does your agency use AI? And if so, how do you implement it?
What was that? AI? I didn't get that.
Are you using AI tooling? And
AI.
Yeah, where and how are you
Yeah,
implementing it?
that's a great. We just had an internal Slack thread going out around this morning about this, and occasionally I'd love to ping the development team about this. As you can tell by the color of the facial hair on me, I've been around for a while, and I will say I think my philosophy with AI right now is let everybody else do all the experimenting and failing, and then seeing what sort of sticks, and seeing how that might be relevant to what we're doing. The one thing that I refuse to do is to jump on a bandwagon or a fad too soon and start to force AI in ways that just that our clients aren't needing it. So we definitely have our and there are some interesting things out there that we're looking at, and we have I would say we have a little carve out of time for our development team where each month or each quarter we like to kind of focus on some little R&D projects, and that's definitely one of those things that we're experimenting with how can AI not just for the sake of it, but how can it actually make our clients' lives easier, whether it's marketing people who are trying to drum up a project description for a project. Is there a way where maybe based on the data structure of that project, how that client could potentially kind of lean on AI for maybe a potential suggestion for a draft of a project write-up that might sort of align with their brand voice and brand tone, but at the same time communicate something in a really concise and effective manner. So that's where we're doing some experimentation with it right now, but haven't committed to really, deploying anything to our client base just yet. We want to see what, sort of shakes out in the marketplace as it relates to that. It's obviously it's not going away. But we just want to make smart choices around how that gets deployed. I've seen some really awful examples of how, some products or platforms are forcing AI on their users, and it's just complete disaster with how that's being rolled out.
Excellent. Watch your space. Final question. So before we wrap up, it's been a really interesting discussion. How long did a full transition kind of to specialization take? So you said you started that journey 5 years ago. When do you think you really, made it to the point where you could say we are a specialist in this? And then the other part is, how did you handle the non-AEC clients during that transition? And so was that kind of natural attrition? You just stopped taking on new work? But yeah, so the time it took, and then the transition piece for the non-AEC people.
Yeah, so I think the transition piece, maybe I'll tackle that one first. And it definitely gave us an opportunity to do a little of, house cleaning. And, whether it's, maybe, clients who may have been just difficult clients and, would question, a 45-minute, time entry on a particular month. Or so it definitely allowed us to do a little bit of that. We still have, with some of these non-AEC clients, who are our legacy clients I refer to, we've still kept the ones, we still have, some of those relationships in place. We don't just, but we don't actively pursue that. In terms of sort of the general time frame, again, I would say that, the original exposure to this industry was, it was 15 years ago. There was no light bulb at that moment that went off where I said, hey, let's, this is an industry that we really need to kind of, hone in on and focus in on. So, but I would say that, that 5 year time frame, and then probably like a good 1.5 to 2 years into that was, it probably took a couple years to really sort of just, to create that new, some of those habits and just that muscle memory, I guess, if you will, that really allowed us just to really be disciplined about, the focus on this particular sector and making sure that, all of our efforts, aside from, some of those legacy clients, is really being put into this particular sector. And there's never really an end point. It's an ongoing process. I mean, to think that I'm now some expert on the AEC sector. I mean, I've got enough knowledge to be able to have conversations with people and to really be able to articulate, our understanding of the industry. But, you really always have to be hungry for just, more knowledge and gaining more insights, because, things change pretty quickly.
Excellent. All right, well, Scott, let's wrap it up there. We've just gone slightly over time. So thank you very much for sharing your insights, practical experience. For those interested in learning more about NK Interactive and their work in the AEC sector, you can find Scott on LinkedIn. We'll also have an opportunity to share his details post the call. If you're considering specializing for your agency, remember my takeaway from your 3 key pieces were defining what you want and who you want to be, looking for the opportunities across, the various sectors that you work with, and then, listen and learn about those so that you can really kind of go deep within that industry. We will, of course, be sharing the recording of this session. One last request. When you exit the webinar, you'll be presented with a survey at BugHerd. We love feedback, so it gives us the opportunity to get your input to make these sessions more informative and useful moving forward. Thanks all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Scott. I really love the chat.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks.